you may think that this is just a toy railway. However, the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway has developed nearly 100 years of history that has proven it must be considered as seriously as any full-scale mainline. And yes, you should never overlook a little engine and all of that. Stretching 13.5 miles across the Kent coast between Hythe and Dungeness, this is the world's only miniature main line, and for a long time, the world's smallest public railway. 15-inch gauge express engines race across marshland and desert landscapes at a scale speed of 75 to 90 miles an hour, which is about 25 miles an hour in reality, but that's still the running speed of most standard gauge railways in the UK. So, own up, whose model railway got a bit out of hand then? Come on. It was the dream project for two racing drivers and close friends. Count Louis Zabrowski had a pastime of running a miniature railway at his estate, but also for blowing up full-size buildings just for the fun of it. Believe me, I was surprised when I read that too. Incidentally, this is the opposite of me, who has blown up miniature buildings in his garden and wants a full-size railway. Zabrowski is famous as an engineer for developing the racing cars that eventually got the nickname Chitty Bang Bangs. Captain John Jack Howie came back from serving on planes in World War I to pursue his interest in trains and cars again. Together, the pair wanted to run their own railway. It was the 1920s and they were millionaires. Who was going to say no to them? They approached the Ravenglass and Eskdale Railway in Cumbria and sweet-talked their way into buying the entire line. They said no. Howie approached famous miniature railway engineer Henry Greenley to find a suitable route to build their own line instead, whilst Zabrowski got him to design and build two express engines in anticipation. Not being sour at all, they got permission for the first engine, Green Goddess, to be tested at the Ravenglass. Sadly, before a single rail could be laid, Zabrowski died in a racing accident in 1924, so he never got to see his childhood dream become a reality, and Howie continued the venture alone. Eventually, Greenley suggested running on the flat plains of the Kent coast, and Howie soon got permission from the Southern Railway and the local councils. Perhaps they didn't think the railway would be much more than a fairground attraction. The Ministry of Transport did though, as they were asked for permission to carry fare-paying passengers. They said that as they'd provided all of the strict safety measures expected on a full-size mainline, they could run as one. Work was soon underway building double track between Hythe and New Romney, and on the 5th of August 1926, they were visited by the Duke of York, future King George VI. Sir Nigel Gresley also came along to chill in the tender apparently, which is fair payment since he had given permission for Howie and Greenley to base the engine designs on his A1 Pacifics. Another 6 engines had joined the original 2 by the time the railway officially opened on the 16th of July 1927. With the inaugural train pulled by No. 5 Hercules. Gresley and the Southern Railway's Richard Maunsell also rocked up to the party. Unrelated, but the railway was an immediate success, and Howie was clearly confident that it would be, because before it had even opened, he was planning an extension all the way to Dungeness Beach. This was opened the following year, and everyone was happy forevermore. The War Department took over the line in World War II, as being on the Kent coast, the whole area was under great risk of attack, or even invasion, particularly during the evacuation of Dunkirk. In the early years, the line transported and supplied reinforced concrete sound ranging detectors, or sound mirrors, that were built along the coast, to help detect enemy aircraft, with a little branch off of the main line serving these. Hercules was kitted out as an armoured train, whilst the Ravenglass and Eskdale sent 2 hopper wagons to Ashford Works, to be converted with miniature gun and rifle turrets. You'd almost think it was a joke, seeing such a small railway playing such an active defence role. So long as the soldiers ducked under the bridges, it's quite low. There were claims that they did manage to shoot down at least 1 German plane, But this has often been mocked by saying that perhaps the pilot saw the small train and track and didn't realise how close to the ground he was until it was too late. In 1943, the line also played a vital role in a top-secret mission, Operation Pluto. Sounds all fancy and technical, but it stood for Pipeline Under the Sea. It was one of two fuel pipelines stretched across the English Channel to provide Allied forces with petrol after the Normandy landings. The railway took the pipe components to Dungeness, where they were then assembled together and dragged across the Channel. By the end of the war, the railway had been left in a critically poor state, and the full line was not back in working order until 1947, though the Dungeness section had to be reduced to single track, because there simply weren't enough new rails available. It wasn't all doom and gloom though, because Laurel and Hardy came to reopen it, and the little railway soldiered on. Unlike the full-scale railways of Britain, the RHDR benefited from the growth of individually owned motorcars as people flocked to the beach once more in the 50s, including the royal family in 1957.
Train now approaching platform 3, lane 3 service to Hythe, calling the Dymchurch at Hythe.
But in the mid-60s, things skydived once more with the increasing popularity of flying abroad. Captain Howie passed away in September 1963, and his ashes are now buried at New Romney by a rock garden. His wife decided that she couldn't keep the railway going and sold it on. It struggled under different ownerships for another 9 years, until in 1972 it was prepared to be sold, engines, coaches, track and all. Sir William McAlpine stepped in to financially support a team of volunteers who together saved the line, which is heartwarming really, as a year later after saving the miniature version, McAlpine would go on to save Flying Scotsman from being stranded in the United States. From then onwards, the Romney has regained and retained its popularity and is steaming ahead to its centenary in 2027. In 1977, they began running a school train to save congestion on the roads, but declining use meant this had to stop in 2015. Alongside passengers, the railway was always intended to be used for goods, but this never truly took off. Special fish vans were built to carry loads straight from the fishing boats on the beach to be transferred by road at Hythe, but these only saw limited success in the earliest days of the line. Hoppers were built to carry shingle to be used as ballast, which were tipped into a storage container at Hythe by use of a loading ramp, and then from what is now the coaling road at New Romney. The railway is also officially licensed to carry post, and any letters or parcels will be delivered by rail for collection at any station. Post-war, the only goods carried by the railway are either maintenance trains or one-off contracts. It hasn't always been smooth running though, as almost all of the engines have been involved in an accident over the years, in one form or another. The railway has no less than 13 level crossings, where road drivers had underestimated just how serious the warning lights were. Lessons have been learnt from these accidents though, and as many safety measures as possible have been assured to make sure these things don't happen again. And everybody was happy forevermore. Let's look at the engines. Apart from the bug, all of the original steam engines were designed by Henry Greenley, based on Nigel Gresley's Great Northern A1 Pacifics, although adapted to suit their various roles. They were built by Davy Paxman Engineering Co. in Colchester, Essex, apart from the Bug and Black Prince, which were built in Germany. Something distinctive about the rolling stock here is the variety of colours and whistles on the engines. Each paint scheme for the engines and coaches is based on a livery from one of the big railway companies, and the whistles are mostly from standard gauge engines. The engines have seen several changes of tender throughout the years, but the current ones are fitted with radio equipment and can fit either 1 or 2 people on the footplate. The first 3 engines were dedicated express passenger engines. Numbers 1 and 2 were ordered as the first batch delivered in 1925. Number 1 Green Goddess was named after Howie's favourite play. Number 2, Northern Chief, is distinguished from Green Goddess by a set of peppercorn-style smoke deflectors. In 2006, the tender was fitted with solar panels to charge the radio units, making it the only solar-powered fitted steam engine, but these didn't last long. Number 3, Southern Maid, arrived in 1926, and originally was going to be called Southern Chief, in a similar pattern to number 2, but the plates were removed and it was renamed before it entered traffic. Number 4, The Bug. This is an ugly duckling of a loco because it's got a sad story that probably deserves its own video in the future, covering it in more detail. But to summarise, built in 1926 at the Krauss Loco Works by the designer Roland Martins, it was intended to help with the construction of the line and was never seriously considered as part of the running fleet. But it arrived a little too late, and it wasn't really needed once the line was open, so it was sold in 1933 to a Blackpool fairground owner. It ended up being scrapped in Belfast in 1950. But it actually wasn't. In 1972, Sir William Save Steam Engines If I Can McAlpine wandered by one day and found the rusty hulk of what was once the Bug, buried under a mountain of scrap. He rescued it and had it restored at the Romney, where it now finally belongs. It's still too small and weak to take the regular passenger trains, but it helps out at Christmas and special events, with the new nickname and fan club, Basil. Number 5, Hercules, was built in 1927 alongside identical twin Samson, though the pair were originally to be named Man of Kent and Maid of Kent. Greenlee took the Gresley shape of engines 1 to 3, but adapted them to a 482 Mountaineer wheel arrangement, the only two found in the UK. The pair were originally built with an extension to Sandling Junction in mind, which would have included very steep gradients, but this was rejected in favour of the Dungeness line instead. They were still ordered though, with the prospect that ballast trains would require heavy goods locos, but these never properly flourished, and their long wheelbases caused them both to derail on the points, until these were replaced post-war. Hercules took the opening day train, but was generally left neglected until 1936, which left it in good time to be chosen as the armoured train engine in World War II. Number 6 Samson is identical to Hercules, but was often used for spare parts during the war. Number 7 Typhoon and sister Hurricane were also built in 1927 to serve Howie's push for more power and speed. And therefore, they were 3-cylinder versions of the earlier Pacifics. However, the central cylinder didn't translate well to such a small scale, and both had it cut from use soon after. Before being delivered to the railway, Typhoon was sent to King's Cross to pose with bigger counterpart Flying Scotsman, which was recreated at the Bluebell Railway in 2017. Number 8 Hurricane was reportedly the captain's favourite, but after a scrape in 1938, when he was at the controls, the view quickly changed and the engine was renamed Blue Bottle as a sort of punishment until 1946, though this was more likely to coincide with it pulling the Blue Train. The engine's fitted with an A4 chime whistle, which was gifted from Sir Nigel Gresley, in return for a Canadian chime whistle that the captain had given him. Number 9 and number 10 were built in 1931 by several firms and eventually assembled at the railway. Both are designed with Canadian Railroad inspiration, but they've had a lot of American parts over the years too. This was mainly to provide bigger cabs for the crew so that they were more protected during winter. If anyone's ever sat on a British beach in the winter, you can understand why. Here's where things get confusing with names. Number 9, Winston Churchill, was originally called Dr. Sin, but was patriotically renamed in 1948 to commemorate the Prime Minister before being sent to Toronto for an exhibition. From 1973 to 79, it was refitted to burn oil instead of coal, as oil prices were cheaper, but this didn't last long. Number 10, Dr. Sin, is named after a local legend, but it was originally called Black Prince, although an unused nameplate also suggests it may have been called Black Devil. It took number 9's name after 1948. Both 9 and 10 had scaled down Vanderbilt tenders when built, but these were often faulty and caused leaks. When number 10 was just 2 weeks old, it became separated from its tender, leaving the driver and the train, as the loco shot off on its own before derailing on a corner. And both now have Greeny-style tenders instead. Number 11, Black Prince, was not one of the original engines. Being built by Krupp in 1937, its original name was this, which, according to very quick research, means small flower. Aww. It was one of 3 engines built for a trade fair in Dusseldorf. The previous owner eventually sold the other 2 to the Bressingham Steam Museum in Norfolk, but kept one for sentimentality. Eventually, they decided it best to sell it to the RHDR, where it has lived since 1976, apart from a trip away to attend an exhibit in Japan. The railway also has 2 named diesels, both built by TMA Engineering, as well as a handful of smaller motive power for shunting, or aren't often used or are privately owned. Number 12, JB Snell, was built in 1983 and was renamed after the passing of long-serving managing director John Snell. Before this, it was called John Southland, after the founder of a school in New Romney. Number 14, Captain Howie, was built in 1989 and named after the founder of the line. Both are able to have snowplows fitted to help out in the winter. In terms of coaches, the railway originally built 117 four-wheeled semi-open coaches that were pretty cold on such a coastal railway, and they were quickly replaced with enclosed bogie coaches instead. Only a handful of vintage coaches exist from this time, as the railway is constantly building new ones on site. The trains are extremely long here, and usually hold around 200 passengers. There's also a massive licensed bar car, and a royal saloon too, which carried the Queen when she visited in '57. So that's the fleet of happy little engines and coaches, but what's their home like? The railway officially starts at Hythe, which is a scaled-down London terminus-style station, with a central loop and a roof across all the platforms. Here the engines are turned before heading out across the Royal Military Canal on a 5-mile straight across marshland to Dymchurch. This also once had an overall roof, but nowadays is just a simple countryside station. Beyond is St Mary's Bay, which is mostly a request stop. Edith Nesbit, author of The Railway Children, used to live in a cottage quite close to the station. Onwards is Romney Warren, which is a request stop for the Romney Marsh Visitor Centre. The railway travels through farmland to New Romney, headquarters for the line and where most activity happens. This is where the engine and carriage sheds are, as well as the workshops. You can often ask to look inside the sheds, particularly on special event days. The track leads into the car park where the engines are cold, whilst the station itself doubles as a series of sidings. There is a model exhibition here, which cost a small fee to enter. The Duke of Sutherland's private standard gauge engine, Dun Robin, used to be on display here for a short time. And speaking of standard gauge, there used to be a line quite close to the station here, but now it's just the miniature railway that lives on. Recently opened is the old paint shops as a heritage centre, showing artefacts and photos of the railway throughout the ages. The line continues onwards through housing estates to Romney Marsh, which is a passing loop for trains on the single track section. From here it heads out onto the shingle beach. Dungeness itself has an eerie atmosphere to it, as it is officially classified as a desert, and it feels strangely flat and open. The nuclear power station that dominates the skyline probably doesn't help, but it has a visitor centre and I'm sure it means well, as does the lifeboat visitor centre. Dungeness station itself sits on a balloon loop so that the engines don't have to run round, and trains stop just outside of the old lighthouse, where you can pay to walk to the top and look out to the replacement lighthouse. Close by are the remains of the old South Eastern Railway terminus, which closed here in 1937, but the branch itself still serves the power plant. A lot of the cottages nearby are built around old railway carriages, and the tracks used by fishermen to convey their catch to the miniature railway are still largely in place. But the whole area has a strict policy on no trespassers or photography, which again doesn't help with the whole creepy vibe you get here. If nuclear war does break out though, you can always hop back on the train. During special events, the line often runs non-stop trains, all the 13.5 miles back to Hythe. Which brings us to what makes this little big railway so special. Even though the trains are small, because you're sitting so close to the ground, racing along at 25 miles an hour feels like you're on one of the luxury expresses from the golden age of steam. Sitting with the door partly open as you fly past World War II pillboxes, seeing scaled-down British, Canadian and German engines working in one place, and having them fly past on double track, undoubtedly makes this an experience rather than just a miniature train ride. The engines here easily work as hard as their bigger counterparts, as the trains are perhaps the longest on a UK railway in terms of the number of coaches. Over nearly 100 years, the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway has grown from being a rich man's train set, serving its country in its darkest hour, to becoming one of Kent's most popular attractions. I'd end on a poetic statement here, but I've already said the quote about never overlooking a little engine at the start, so I won't. If you'd like to visit the line yourself, then its headquarters are at New Romney in Kent, but the nearest big transport hubs serve Hythe Station from Ashford and Folkestone. You can park at Hythe, Dymchurch, New Romney and Dungeness. Trains run regularly from spring to autumn, and Santa special trains run towards Christmas if you want to catch the winter bug. See the description for a link to their website, and tune in next month when we'll visit another railway. Or you can become a patron of mine and get early access to the next episode of Guide Rail. Toot toot, farewell, goodbye. Thank you to all my brilliant patrons: Alex Goodman, GBH Train, Donald 9 and Douglas 10, D0280 Falcon, Sean Tempest, Kildane's Coven, Nat, Sam Bennett, Alco, Henry Forrester, and Kusa Ryder.